All right, this is Darker Days Radio. I'm one of your hosts, Mike, and tonight I'm joined by Chigg. How's it going, Chigg?
Pretty good, Mike. How you doing?
Oh, I'm just chipper. Had a pretty dull day, which is why I'm so excited to be here with you talking about one of the ultimate role-playing games. And what game is that, Chigg?
Well, that would be Shadowrun.
That's right, Shadowrun. We're going to be talking about how horror is portrayed in Shadowrun, how you can add horror into Shadowrun, and just talking about a little bit of cyberpunk and fantasy today, which is going to be a ton of fun. But before we get to that, Chigg, why don't we get a little game update from you? What kind of gaming have you been doing lately?
Well, as longtime listeners will know, I was running a Masks game for a long time. That wrapped up a couple of weeks ago. There was an epic showdown. The teen heroes saved the world. All went well. Very few people died. No one important. We have since moved on to The Expanse, based on the TV series and novel series of the same name. We've had one session. It's pretty fun. And this one, I get to play in and not run. So I like it a lot.
Outstanding. Yeah. I know a lot of people are really into the Expanse game, and it definitely has some interesting support for how to run that universe outside of the shows, how to kind of do your own thing. And I think it's pretty cool for that.
Yeah. Everything that I've seen about it has been good, interesting, well written. Like I said, I'm enjoying it so far.
And with that game update, let's go on to the gaming news. All right, so we have two things that we want to highlight that just came out. The first is Kith and Kin for Changeling the Lost. This is a sourcebook that includes a ton of new kiths and other player options, as well as storytelling ideas for various motleys. So I almost wanted to call it the player's guide, but Onyx Path doesn't call it that. So it's a pretty cool, pretty nice expansion, and has a lot of great things for players and also a little bit for storytellers as well.
You can play Changeling the Lost without it, but why would you want to? You're leaving money on the table.
And in addition to that, we also have Book of Lasting Death from Mummy the Curse. This has new guilds and also new antagonists. And again, it's a pretty good mix of player and storyteller resources. So definitely another cool book from Onyx Path.
Haven't seen this one. Didn't know it was coming. I'm not big on Mummy the Curse.
Yeah, I just found it. I actually played Mummy the Curse over the summer, and it was awesome. It's a really fun game. And I was just playing one of the immortals in that, not one of the mummies or even just a mundane cultist. I was kind of like in the middle ground, and it was nice. It was a lot of fun, and you get like a really diverse array of powers. So definitely a fun game. Yeah, I didn't know about this source book either until I was just looking around at Drive Through RPG. But there's actually been a bunch of things coming out from Onyx Path lately, and it's a little amusing, Chigg, because the tables have sort of turned. It seems like there's more Chronicles of Darkness content coming out than World of Darkness lately.
Well, the World of Darkness is focused on getting 5th edition Hunter into people's hands, so I understand.
Yeah, and also Werewolf now. That's one of the big things as well that they're now working on and teasing some stuff on. We should probably do an episode on some of the new ideas that they have for Werewolf 5th edition, because I, for one, think they're great.
I think that several of those ideas are fantastic. I haven't seen everything, obviously, but yeah, I like what I've seen so far.
Mm-hmm. Well, people can look forward to more Werewolf content in the future, but for today, let's talk about the 1989 classic Shadowrun. Okay, so for those of you that don't know, this is what Shadowrun is. It's the fantasy cyberpunk mashup RPG. It's set in the years 2050 to 2080 and beyond. One of the cool things is that when FASA was originally releasing this, and also FanPro and now Catalyst Game Labs, every year that passes in our real world also is a year that passes in Shadowrun. So in another couple of years, we'll be catching up to the 2050 that Shadowrun actually started in. So that'll be pretty wild. So Shadowrun's world is one where catastrophic plagues and a return of magic set the stage for an elf, dwarf, troll, and orc inhabited world where megacorporations have seized power in the wake of failing nation states. You play as a Shadowrunner, an operative and disposable asset hired by corporations, governments, and wealthy individuals to steal data, hack the Matrix, liquidate targets, and even go against the corporations themselves. Chigg, I know you're pretty big into Shadowrun, or at least used to be. Which edition did you start with back in the day?
I am very old, and I started way back in high school with first edition. Second edition was out when I started playing, but it was still fairly new, so there weren't a lot of splat books for it. So the guy that wanted to run it had all the first edition books, and so that's what I started with.
Outstanding, yeah. And speaking of splat books, I mean, if you think World of Darkness has a lot of books, just look at Shadowrun. They really pump them out, and they have been continuously since 1989.
And it's amazing because they don't even really technically have splats. But anyway, when did you start, kid?
Oh, geez, I started in 2012, I want to say. Yeah, 2012. We started with the 4th edition / 20th anniversary edition, which is the one which was a little wonky because they got rid of the Deckers and they put in all these hackers. They have the Technomancers, which were a big thing, as basically magical hackers, and also the physical adepts really changed things around as well in that edition.
Was that the first non-FASA edition?
That's correct. Yeah. 20th anniversary was put out by FanPro. Oh, no, I'm sorry. 4th edition was put out by FanPro. 20th anniversary was the repairs that Catalyst Game Labs did to make the book more readable and things a bit more playable. We were using the 20th anniversary edition.
So, which edition is your favorite? I'm assuming that you've tried more than the 1.5 flavors there.
Yeah. I think I played 5th edition the most, and I didn't mind it too much. I was a player and also, the game master as well, and it's very, very granular, incredibly granular. But with 5th edition, the systems kind of did work. It was just a lot to keep in your head. So the edition that I would say I prefer these days is Shadowrun Anarchy, which is kind of an alternate rules light version of the game. It takes a lot of house rules to give it the traditional Shadowrun feel, but just to keep everything in your head and to keep the game flowing smoothly at the table, I think Anarchy is my go-to choice.
I can't imagine playing Shadowrun without all the bookkeeping. That's
yeah.
That's part of the attraction to this game
A little
for
bit,
me.
yeah.
Like I said, I started with 1st edition, but I think 2nd edition is probably my favorite. It cleaned up some of the rules from 1st edition. 3rd edition would go on to clean up even more, but it got rid of the skill web, which is something that I really enjoyed. So,
yeah, that skill web you always talk about. You always opine about it, Chigg. Would you like to share that with our listeners, just to tantalize people with what 1st edition was like and what future Shadowrun could have been like?
Back in my day, right? So the skill web is every skill in so Shadowrunners have attributes, like strength and agility and willpower and intelligence, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And every skill in the game is attached to, runs off of one of those attributes. So if you have car repair, because you're playing a character who is the rigger, the guy who drives the cars and flies the drones. So you have car repair, right? Because you are good at fixing cars, you can base your drive skill off of that. You know how cars work, so you know that if you press this pedal down, it goes fast. If you press that pedal down, it stops, because you've put those pedals in before. So if you don't have a drive skill for whatever reason, but you do have a really high build repair car skill, then you can take what you know from building and repairing cars and use it to drive. Or, to make it less horribly negative penalties, if you know how to build and repair a car, you know how to build an engine, take it out and put it up on the chains and clean it out, whatever. Well, I mean, a boat engine isn't that different from a car engine. So you can take a smaller penalty and use your build and repair automobiles skill with a small penalty to your dice pool to build and repair boats. Now, where this gets in trouble is if you are the greatest neurosurgeon in the world and you have, 17 D6s in neurosurgery, you can take a very hefty penalty and still somehow manage to parlay that into having 4 or 5 dice, which is a decent sized pool, in TV VCR repair. It shouldn't work. It should be no, you can't do that. But technically, yeah, I'm the world's greatest neurosurgeon. Of course I can, hack into this mainframe.
Yeah. It's actually a really clever idea because it doesn't tax people as much for skills. If you are investing in mechanics, then it does make sense that you'd have some skill with driving, for example. Or if you know how to hack into the Matrix, it makes sense that you'd also be able to hack into a vehicle and use those abilities as well, which are usually the purview of another character class. So I really like it in that regard. But you're right, Chigg, that there are some kind of wonky situations that do arise. And this is actually, speaking of not taxing people as much, there's some really weird stuff with skill groupings in the later editions where in that you can buy these groups of skills at like a discount package kind of. So you get like a group of 4 stealth skills, for example, but there's a cap to those. And if you were to buy each skill individually, you could go above that cap. So there's a lot of like weird taxes that go on in later versions of Shadowrun, which I'm not a huge fan of, and just kind of creates some weird inefficiencies. But anyway, I think that's enough about us waxing lyrical about skill systems and game mechanics. I think we should get on, Chigg, to the horror in Shadowrun.
The meat of the episode.
Yeah, that's right. So Shadowrun has had a lot of source books over the years. Way too many. And I've only read a fraction of them, to be perfectly honest.
I don't think anybody has read every Shadowrun source book. If you have, please let me know, listener.
Chigg, are you telling me that the geniuses, the historians at Catalyst Game Labs, haven't read every single source book to the games that they publish?
I'm sure they have access to them, and I'm sure that they've read parts of most of them. But no, I don't think anybody has read the entire catalog.
Yeah, seems unlikely.
I think that you would just go insane if you tried.
And that's a horror trope right there, isn't it? But yeah, so Shadowrun has had so many books, and there's been a lot of horror elements and tropes introduced over the years. And we'll talk about some of the better ideas later, but I think the first really unsung horror theme that's been in Shadowrun since the very beginning is economic horror. The world of Shadowrun is an awful place to live in for 99% of the population. In this world, you need to pay corporations for everything, and I mean everything. Do you want to have police protection? Well, you got to cough up money for Lone Star. Do you want to have actual medical service? Well, you better have a dock wagon contract. Want to have trash removed or have a fire put out? Well, the city can't afford that anymore, even though they're still collecting taxes. So you have to get insured by Franklin Associates for a faster response if you're in an emergency. And this game came out in 1989. But the depressing thing is that some of these living conditions have really become true in the United States, having privatized fire departments, for example, and other things. It's just wild.
Yeah, a world of corporate hegemony where a very few incredibly wealthy corporations and the individuals running them make every item you own, use, or see on a day-to-day basis. That just sounds awful. I'm sure glad that's not how we're... Wait, I'm getting a notification here. Oh yeah, that's bad. This was not like a how-to guide, guys. No.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've joked that the last like 6 years, we've been living in the cyberpunk future, and it's way lamer than we could have thought.
Yeah, I do not have a single implanted device in my body that will let me have, like, ninja skills. I'm upset.
Yeah, I can't even jack directly into the Matrix either. It's crazy. Anyway, so the cyberpunk themes of Shadowrun, and the setting give you an opportunity to explore how economic conditions affect others, especially in a chronically cash poor society.
Yeah, but unlike the other popular cyberpunk game available at the time, which we have reviewed in the past, there's no mechanical reason that you couldn't technically claw your way out of the gutter. It's possible, but it really isn't exceptionally likely to happen. And even if you did, then you're still leaving the vast majority of people behind. So, um, yeah, and the only way that you can really do that is to work for the corporations, and there's not a good one.
No, there isn't. And that's, Chig, you really kind of highlighted something that's very interesting, which is this shift that's really happened in Shadowrun adventures over the years. If you look at some of the very early Shadowrun material, it really is focused on that street level and having to deal with this economic horror and the depressed economic conditions around you. And yes, you can perhaps claw your way up, but that wasn't the focus of some of the initial adventures. But then, as time progressed, that really changed with a lot of the missions and adventures, wherein the official FASA ones got much more epic, especially in second edition and then third edition Shadowrun, where you are dealing with dragons, elven ninja assassins, and all that kind of good stuff, which makes for a lot of really memorable adventures, but it does change the tone drastically from some of the early material. And then, of course, now when people are playing Shadowrun in Sixth World, Fifth Edition, what have you, they've really focused on the mission structure rather than story structures, which is great for getting people to the table and kind of knowing what to expect, and making it very easy for a storyteller to run these missions and adventures. But it really makes it focused on that bookkeeping that you mentioned, collecting your new yen, getting a corporate script, and buying just the upgrades for your character.
Right, and that is a shift away from definitionally cyberpunk to something that I like to think of as cyber pulp, and that it is more adventure-y and more gung-ho, go out there and beat the bad guys and save the day, than it is about taking down the corporations and fighting against oppression and the man.
Very insightful. Very insightful, Chig. So, because there's been that real big shift in tone with Shadowrun, I actually wanted to highlight some of the early adventures, which I think were able to illustrate some of that economic horror that we were just describing. And the first one I want to talk about is Dream Chipper. In this one, Shadowrunners explore the sinister world of BTLs, or beetles, known as better than life chips, and these addict users to stimulated and simulated worlds and pleasures. And also running around, there's maybe a kind of Jack the Ripper sort of character in the background.
Yeah, so BTLs are a very obvious, very thinly covered drug metaphor here. If you didn't pick up on that from Mike's description, it's a way to escape your awful existence for a short time that will eventually probably kill you. Unlike real-world drugs, however, they do this by allowing you to temporarily experience the life of someone much better off than yourself. Somebody who can afford the good things in life, go to the nice places that you'll never visit, eat the delicious foods that aren't grown entirely in a vat, meet beautiful people and have wild sex with them, all in a hyper-realistic way that is, like it says on the package, better than life. So it's easy to see how people who pack themselves into coffin hotels every night might get hooked on those experiences.
Yeah, and as I'm sure you would expect, there's definitely low-level dealers in beetles and the like, but who's really benefiting from all of this? Who's really pumping that stuff out? It's the megacorps.
Sure, beetles are completely illegal and you can't manufacture them. It's against the rules. You'll be fined. But I mean, a fine is a price, and if you're $1 billion corporation, that's the fine is less than you're making off of the crime. So
Next up for adventures, we have Mercurial. And this adventure is great for rockers and investigative reporters as they try to solve the mysteries around who is after rock star Maria Mercurial. This is another cool street level adventure where you're going to clubs, concerts, and the like, dealing with the Yakuza, who are always very prominent in Shadowrun material, as well as some corporate ne'er-do-wells as well. So it's another adventure that a lot of people really like.
yeah, it's a fun adventure. It's fairly straightforward. There's not a lot of options going on there, but yeah, it's a very very good beginner's game adventure to run a group through. And hey, you get to meet a rock star. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's also great for using characters from Chigg's favorite Shadowrun supplement, which is known as Shadowbeat.
I mean, it's the best one. So
It is. I still haven't read it, but it seems awesome.
I'll send you another copy.
There's only 5 of them sitting at half price books right now.
It's a dark and fallen world in which we live.
Yeah. And then the other adventure I wanted to bring up, and I wanted to bring this up because there's a lot of people that talk about it, a lot of people that have fond memories of it, and that's Peacekeeper, which is an adventure exploring the status of various Native American nations who had a resurgence when magic returned. And this is an interesting adventure for exploring non-urban economic horror in the Shadowrun universe.
Yeah, so we should probably touch on the fact that Shadowrun is definitely a product of its time, and that time is the late 80s and early 90s. And it didn't do a really super great job at portraying most minority groups. There was a lot of cultural appropriation in the backstory of the game and the world, and the idea that after magic comes back into the world, indigenous Americans would decide to live in ways that are just very similar to their pre-Columbian ancestors. That's really not a great idea. It is probably better than what the indigenous Mexican people got, though. So
Yeah, with the Aztlan and supplements, and yeah, Shadowrun. Actually, we should probably take note of a couple of really awful things that Shadowrun did. Because it was just written by some people in Chicago, and they weren't really thinking about widespread appeal, issues of misusing other cultures and the like. But yes, Mexico got a really weird thing where basically a corporation owns them all now.
Aztlan only owns like the top quarter of Mexico.
Okay, fair enough.
Just like the United States got broken up into multiple countries, so too did Mexico.
Indeed.
For reasons. Magic reasons.
Indeed. And speaking of magic reasons, if you wanted to run a really cool cyberpunk adventure in Shadowrun Dublin, well, you can't because elves took over everything. And I think, wasn't the entire continent of Africa just turned into like a giant ghoul country? Didn't that happen, Chigg? Am I remembering that?
I don't remember the entire continent of Africa getting a single mention in any of the Shadowrun books I ever read.
Yeah. I don't think it was something they put a lot of thought into, especially not in 1989. So the reason we brought up this adventure, Peacekeeper, is because it is fondly remembered, and a lot of people, I think it's because it was written by Nigel Findlay, who was really good RPG writer from a story and systems perspective, and a lot of people really like that. But of course, we want to just pass along that there are some strange issues that do crop up in Shadowrun that you should be aware of, and we'll talk even more about those later.
We'll get to that.
Yeah, yeah. Now, let's leave behind the economic horror for a little bit, and let's just talk about another little horror trope that you can introduce into your Shadowrun games, which is ghosts in the machine. And this is what happens when people's minds have gotten stuck in the Matrix, and basically the virtual reality internet that everyone uses in Shadowrun. Their minds have gotten stuck in the Matrix when their bodies die or are cut off, and these ghosts can be found haunting dark corners of the net.
Yeah, that's not a thing. Anybody who tells you that happened is either fibbing to you or they were real drunk at the time. Maybe they were on BTLs. Who knows? But decking is perfectly safe, and nobody ever gets their mind ripped out of their body.
Yeah, yeah. Nobody ever hot simmed and something bad happened. Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's a little inaccessible, unfortunately, because the way that Shadowrun's core game mechanics work, decking or hacking is kind of its own mini game, and the rest of the group basically has to sit there while the decker kind of does their own little puzzle solving and dice rolls for 20 to 30 minutes. So you have to kind of think about how to introduce this in a way that's accessible to the rest of the characters, whether it be just a kind of a ghost in the machine that's haunting maybe the physical adept or the street samurai, or just other ways to make it accessible. Maybe messages going to the technomancer as well could be a good way to use the ghost in the machine.
And one thing that makes this even more difficult in pre-4th edition versions, people who used magic didn't really interact with the Matrix at all.
Right.
Like they might access it the way that you or I would access Facebook or Twitter. They might go there to do their shopping or whatever, but they do not plug in because that would mess with their magic.
Correct. Yeah, they would lose essence if they had a cyberjack installed. Yeah, it is challenging. That is one of the big discrepancies in, well, used to be a big discrepancy in Shadowrun, wherein people with cyber tech, they could access and do really cool stuff with technology and the Matrix especially, whereas the shamans and thaumaturges, they and physical adepts, they were able to do stuff with magic and the spirit world. So, technology and spirit world were kind of these two separate things that they got to interact with. And in later editions, that line has been really blurred, wherein there's now the Technomancer, which is kind of like a magical sort of hacker. And the magic has gotten more and more into the Matrix side of things as well, which some people really like. I try to keep them separate personally in my games.
Yeah, I will bow to your expertise on that because that happened after I stopped playing Shadowrun.
But there was something that happened back when you played Chigg, and that's Bug City. But I guess before we get to that, maybe we should talk about shamans a little bit.
Right. So, like we just went over, there have always been various different types of magic users in Shadowrun. You have your hermetic mages, who learn magic by writing down formulae and doing math and all that fun stuff. And then you have the shamans, who have spirit guides. Again, it's kind of culturally appropriation-y, and it's very what's what I'm looking for here, reductive. But yes, spirits are real. They can talk to you, and they can adopt you, and you can have a nature spirit who is your patron, and you get bonuses on doing some things, and you get bans on doing other things. In fact, it's kind of werewolfy in that way, sort of.
Yeah.
But yeah, then we have Bug City, which has insect spirits, and they are a whole different kettle of fish. Mike, want to tell us about insect spirits?
Absolutely, absolutely. So insect spirits, they're body horror on the surface, but they also push forward some of the economic horror of this setting. So the insect spirits are actually returning alongside magic, and they're heralds of the horrors that have tormented the world in previous ages. And these insect spirits, they influence some shamans as kind of like a way to like quick power and the like, and influence them into creating these insidious cults within cities. These cults then target the poor, disaffected, and the ill to be invested with larval bug spirits. And this is usually not with their consent. You know, they kind of join this cult, they drink some Kool-Aid. Well, without them knowing, there's now a bug spirit in them. And given time, these insect spirits will grow and they will slowly take over the host's body, becoming these half spirit, half bug flesh forms. And it's pretty gross, and the insect spirits have taken over the city of Chicago in the setting.
Yeah, the entire city of Chicago is run by these nasty bug creatures, and the army has set up a barricade around the city to keep them from getting out, and to keep you, the player character, from getting in. Why would you want to go into a city infested with nasty bug spirits? To loot it, obviously. It's a fantastically huge dungeon.
Yeah, definitely. You know, Shadowrunners would get hired by a corporation to go steal the secrets of secrets left behind by a different corporation in there. So they have to sneak past the barricade, get in, and well, it's probably not going to turn out well for them in the end. But rarely do Shadowruns turn out well.
But yeah, Bug City is my favorite setting source book, like location guide, for any game that I've ever read. It's so gross. The insect spirits are so horrifying. I love everything about it.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. But that is just one instance, really the only instance where, you know, the insect spirits really took over. In all the other cities, they're kind of like an issue kind of sneakily existing under the surface. There's cults like the Universal Brotherhood, which look like they're above board New Age cults. Nothing too wrong with that. But they secretly spread hives throughout many major cities. And I also had an idea for a bug spirit cult, which would literally just be like a bunch of people with MBAs, basically. They're always talking about investiture, investment, that sort of thing, and they see these bug spirits as just another asset for them to grow. Oh, so that would be a cool basis for an adventure.
It's not a pyramid scheme, it's a hive scheme. See, it's completely different.
Right. And for other ideas to kind of bring in some horror tropes, we of course have the cleaners. So if you are someone that likes a low power RPG, their Shadowruns could just end up as the cleaning crew for their city. So rooting out ghouls that are down in the sewers, or maybe exterminating shadow critters, or even bug spirits too.
I'm fairly certain this was in one of the early FASA novels where a character gets hired by the city to do sewer maintenance, and it turns out that involves a high-powered automatic rifle. In addition to, like cleaning blocked sewer tunnels and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe it.
So, in addition to the supernatural horror and the economic horror, we also have groups like the Humanist Poly Club. And they are, in fact, mentioned in the Peacekeeper adventure that we talked about earlier. So what are the Humanist Poly Club? Well, when magic came back into the world, it brought a process known as goblinization, which is something that Mike mentioned earlier as well. A percentage of the global population woke up one day, and they were no longer humans as you and I know them. They were what were previously considered fantasy creatures. They were elves, and they were dwarves, or they were orcs, and they were trolls. And naturally, a lot of people just absolutely hated these people who did nothing wrong and were quite literally just born that way. And that is absolutely not, and never has been, a metaphor for anything at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure it hasn't.
But yeah, so there's a whole big group of people in white hoods who call
Oof.
themselves, yeah, the Humanist Poly Club, because Poly Club is a political club. They don't have parties, they have clubs. Who see it as their mission in life to make the lives of those who are different from them absolutely miserable. I mean, maybe those dwarves and trolls and orcs and elves could just go somewhere else, away from real Americans, the freaks. So yeah, racism is a thing in Shadowrun. The Humanist Poly Club is treated as a group of bad guys because they're racist, and they are in fact bad guys because they're racist. But if you're playing a non-human character, and they're fun to play, everybody likes to play an orc or a dwarf or whatever every now and again. There is a non-zero chance that a racist you bump into might just decide to make your day worse. And this could be anything from being ignored at a restaurant to being shot at. So, real life horrors, fantasy setting style.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So this is something that I don't want to say got shoehorned in because clearly this is something that exists in our society. There's going to be racism or other discriminations that take place in the Shadowrun setting. They do things kind of weird in Shadowrun where I don't know who said this originally, but there was this idea that the ethnic racism of our modern world goes away once the Shadowrun metatypes, elves, dwarves, trolls, orcs, etc., appear in the world, which seems like a really poor way to just kind of whitewash a real issue away, and then just kind of to ham-fistedly replace it with this Humanist Pala Club, for example. Really, all these things are going to exist in Shadowrun, and I had a player in my game that tried to play around with like an orc support group, for example, and it got kind of weird, to be honest. Wherein I think it might have been just better to just talk about things as they exist in the real world, say with Latin Americans, Black Americans, etc., rather than just kind of this sort of tongue-in-cheek approach to it.
Yeah,
So that's how I think about this.
I'm not sure I want to tackle racism, real world or otherwise, in my games. I game
Mhm.
with a very pale group, so
Indeed.
I don't think my group is the one that should be tackling this kind of thing. I agree that it is a thing that you can work into your gaming sessions, and if this is a thing that helps you work through some real life issues that you or incidents that you may have dealt with in your past, hey, more power to you. But the way that they do it is in Shadowrun is, I think that might be more fantastic than saying, hey, there's elves.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Chigg, that's all I've got for horror in Shadowrun. Are there any other things that you want to bring up based on your vast knowledge of the setting? There's, of course, like vampires and ghouls and stuff. If you just want to have like kind of the undead style horror, of course they're not really undead; they're just infected with a
Sir,
really
they
sinister
are
virus.
sick, and there is a treatment for it, and you should not discriminate against them just because they have an incurable disease. So yeah, that's kind of something that's in there as well. Yeah, there are people who have the human metahuman vampire virus HMHVV, and some of them can only survive by eating dead flesh, and some of them can only survive by drinking blood. And it is treated as a disease. There is no known cure, at least as of the supplements that I read. Maybe they did that later editions. But yeah, it's It's not exactly an AIDS metaphor, or it wasn't at the time, but it was very close.
It was definitely in the back of their mind when they made that. I've never used the vampires or ghouls in any of my Shadowrun games, actually. So I don't know. If I ever run Shadowrun again, maybe I'll do something with that. I'll think about it.
I had a groundhog shaman who set up a community for the outcasts of society who had a colony of ghouls who lived nearby. They were surprisingly effective at like trash maintenance and getting rid of stuff that nobody else wanted. So,
That was really, really progressive of your groundhog shaman.
well, groundhog shamans like mission in life, I forget the term they use, is to build communities.
Cool.
So they're fun to play.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's another. I never knew about that. That's really awesome. All right, so that's it for Shadowrun this episode, and of course we are Darker Days Radio. We have our link tree where you can find all of our social media on the internet, and of course we really like to highlight our Discord. That's where I spend most of my social media time, just chatting with people, brainstorming ideas, finding really crazy tumblers, reviewing every single Shadowrun First Edition adventure. That was very beneficial for reviewing this episode and getting ready with the show notes and all that. So definitely check that out. Chigg, is there any social media that you want to highlight? Or any podcasts that you want to highlight that you might be on soon?
I will be recording as the senior Mythos correspondent an episode of Mage the Podcast coming soon. It's a fantastic podcast. If you're at all interested in Mage the Ascension, I highly recommend it.
Cool. Yeah, we'll put a link to the show notes to Terry's Mage Show. And I think that's all we got for this episode. Take it easy, everyone, and have a good night.
Stay safe out there.
This has been an episode of Darker Days Radio. Special thanks to Occam's Laser for the intro, outro, and new bumper music from their hit album, 9 Circles. Check out the rest of their work at occamslaser.bandcamp.com.